She was not born a Kennedy. She was not born into power or politics or the most famous cursed family in American history. She was just a girl from White Plains, New York, who worked hard, who built herself, who fell in love with the wrong man or perhaps the right man at the wrong time. Carolyn Bessette was 33 years old when she died. She had been a Kennedy wife for exactly 1,028 days. In that time, the press turned her into a ghost. The Kennedy family made her feel like an outsider, and the man she loved could not protect her from any of it. I'm Mary, and today we are going to talk about the woman nobody truly saw while she was alive. The real Carolyn Bessette, not the ice queen the tabloids invented. The woman underneath who was terrified and brilliant and trying every single day to survive a world that had decided she did not belong. Because what happened to Carolyn Bessette Kennedy is not just a love story. It is something darker, and it has never been fully told. To understand what was done to Carolyn Bessette, you first need to understand who she actually was, before the cameras found her. Before the name Kennedy attached itself to hers like a chain. The girl from White Plains. Carolyn Jean Bessette was born on the 7th of January 1966 in White Plains, New York. Her father was an architectural engineer. Her mother worked as a school administrator. She had two older sisters, twins Lauren and Lisa. It was a normal, middle-class Catholic household in suburban New York. Her parents divorced when she was 8 years old. Her mother remarried and moved to Old Greenwich, Connecticut. The family split quietly, without drama, the way most families split. At St. Mary's High School, her classmates voted her the ultimate beautiful person. Not because she performed for them, but because she simply was. Tall, graceful. A presence that looked effortless but wasn't. She attended Boston University, graduating in 1988 with a degree in elementary education. She had wanted to teach children. That was her original plan. The world had a different one. Calvin Klein, building herself from nothing. After college, Carolyn Bessette started working for Calvin Klein first as a saleswoman at the Chestnut Hill Mall in Newton, Massachusetts. She was noticed almost immediately, not just for her looks, but for something harder to define. An intelligence, a presence, an instinct for style that went beyond what she wore and extended to how she moved through a room. Susan Sokol, president of Calvin Klein Collection, promoted her to handle the brand's most high-profile clients, Annette Bening, Diane Sawyer, the most powerful women in New York. By the time she left the company, Carolyn Bessette was director of show productions, earning a salary in the low six figures. She was 28 years old. She had built herself entirely on her own terms. She was not famous. She did not seek attention. She was simply excellent at her work, and that was enough. And then, one day in 1992, a man walked into Calvin Klein for a private fitting. His name was John F. Kennedy, Jr., the man she refused the detail nobody tells you. When John F. Kennedy, Jr. first pursued Carolyn Bessette, she turned him down. She turned down the most eligible bachelor in America, the son of a president, the man Esquire had called the sexiest man alive. She didn't think he was serious. She had watched him return repeatedly to Daryl Hannah. She had watched him be careless, and she had decided quietly, firmly, that she would not be the next woman he was careless with. It took him 2 years to convince her. 2 years. Of pursuing her seriously. Of proving that he meant it. When she finally said yes, she meant it completely. But that happiness, that recognition was not going to last. Part 3, first crack. 5:12 to 950 words. The first crack did not come from inside the relationship. It came from outside, from cameras, from strangers with long lenses and no conscience. The paparazzi, what nobody fully told you. From the moment Carolyn Bessette started dating John Kennedy Jr. in 1994, photographers began following her. Not them, her. Specifically her. Because she was new. Because she was beautiful. Because she was a mystery. They staked out her apartment building. They followed her to the grocery store. They waited outside her office. They tracked her across New York City every single day. She moved 4 times in 5 years. each time hoping to outrun the cameras. Each time, they found her within weeks. Biographer Elizabeth Beller described what the cameras did to her. She was terrified. Absolutely terrified. If she was alone without John, the photographers would close in. They would yell slurs at her. Vile, degrading words screamed in her face on a public street, designed to make her cry or flinch or show anger, so they could photograph that expression and sell it with a headline that said, "Trouble in Camelot." She learned to walk with her eyes down, like a prisoner in her own city. She told her closest friend, Carol Radziwill, the only way to avoid them is to leave the apartment at 7 in the morning. 7 in the morning. Every single day. This was her life. The secret wedding, one night of peace. When John proposed in July 1995 on a fishing boat off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, she waited 3 weeks before she answered, because she already understood what saying yes would mean. She had already seen what the cameras did. She already knew that becoming Carolyn Bessette Kennedy would change everything. She said yes anyway, because she loved him. Not his name, not his legacy, him. Their wedding on the 21st of September 1996 was one of the most carefully guarded secrets in Kennedy family history. The location, Cumberland Island, off the coast of Georgia, was not revealed to guests until the weekend before. 40 people, candlelight, a tiny 19th century wooden chapel. No press, no cameras. For one single night, Carolyn Bessette got to be just a woman marrying the man she loved, in private, without the world watching. It was the last private moment of her life. The Kennedy family, the welcome she never got. Carolyn Bessette never felt fully accepted by the Kennedy family. When she first visited the Kennedy compound at Hyannisport, she was completely unprepared for the family dynamic. The Kennedys discussed current events at the dinner table, as a matter of course, politics, policy, world affairs. It was expected. It was the language of that house. Ethel Kennedy, Robert Kennedy's formidable widow, reportedly asked Carolyn directly about the recent assault weapons ban. Carolyn, a fashion publicist from Connecticut, had no political answer ready. Ethel reportedly confided to her son afterward that Carolyn was all smoke and mirrors. One dinner, one question, already dismissed. She had walked into that house as a woman who had built herself entirely on her own, and she was judged unworthy before she had finished her first meal. And she was never quite allowed to forget it. In about 15 minutes, I am going to show you the moment that made everything impossible. The revelation that changes how you see every single photograph of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy looking haunted and alone. But there was something else hidden underneath all of this. Something that nobody reported at the time. And it is the key to understanding everything that came after. After the wedding, things got worse. Not better. Worse. The Ice Queen label. Because Carolyn Bessette Kennedy would not perform for the cameras because she walked with her eyes down and refused to smile on command, the tabloids invented a character to replace her. They called her the Ice Queen. Cold, difficult, unfriendly, aloof, a woman destroying America's most beloved bachelor. Every single one of those words was a lie. Biographer Elizabeth Beller spent years collecting testimony from people who actually knew Carolyn. Friends described someone who laughed constantly, who was warm, empathetic, deeply caring, genuinely interested in the people around her. When she didn't want to give them a narrative, one was created for her, Beller explained. The Ice Queen was not a person, it was a story the press invented, because the real Carolyn, a terrified private woman trying to hold her marriage together, was not interesting enough to sell. They needed a villain, so they made one. Out of her. Diana's death changed everything. On the 22nd of July 1997, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy attended Gianni Versace's funeral in Miami. She sat directly behind Princess Diana. 5 weeks later, Princess Diana was dead. Killed in a Paris tunnel, fleeing from paparazzi in a high-speed car chase. Carolyn had sat behind her. She had watched her. She had seen up close what fame and cameras and a relentless press could do to a woman who only wanted to live privately. Carolyn was horrified by Diana's death, Rosemarie Terenzio told People magazine. She was also rattled by the fact that it could happen to John, that it could happen to her. After Diana died, Carolyn's fear of the cameras became something deeper, something closer to dread, because now she had proof. The cameras did not care whether she lived or died. They would follow her until something broke, and they would photograph the breaking. She could not work. After her marriage, Carolyn had left Calvin Klein with plans to build a new career. She could not. Every time she tried to step into a professional space, the paparazzi followed. Every office she approached became a circus. Every meeting she tried to take became a story. It had become increasingly impossible for her to walk into an office due to the stalking paparazzi's presence, Bella writes. She told her friend Jonathan Soroff that she would love to be working but couldn't. Life has become a circus, she said. The woman who had built herself from a mall salesgirl to director of show productions at Calvin Klein was now trapped, unable to work, unable to walk outside without being followed, unable to build anything that was truly hers. She had given up her name, her career, her privacy, her freedom to move through her own city. And what did the world give her in return? The Ice Queen label, the troubled wife headlines, the daily photographs of her walking with her eyes down printed with captions designed to humiliate, the baby they could not have. Carolyn and John had wanted children. But after the wedding, after the paparazzi, after Diana's death, after 3 years of living in a fishbowl, Carolyn's position had changed. She no longer felt she could bring a child into their world. A child who would grow up with photographers outside the door every morning. A child who would never know what it meant to walk to school without cameras. A child born not into a family, but into a story that had been running since 1963. This became one of the deepest fractures in their marriage. John wanted a family. Carolyn wanted one too, but not like this. Not in this world they were living in. Not until things were different. But things were never different. Every month that passed, the cameras were still there. The headlines were still cruel. The Kennedy compound was still a place where she did not quite belong. The baby they both wanted became the thing they could not agree on. And that silence, that absence, sat between them every single day. And this was only the beginning. The real tragedy was still ahead. And now the moment I promised you 15 minutes ago. The marriage was falling apart. By 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy were in crisis. John was struggling to keep his magazine George afloat. Advertisers were pulling out. The publication he had built from nothing, his life's work outside of law, was hemorrhaging money, and he could not stop it. His closest friend, Anthony Radziwill, husband of Carolyn's best friend Carol, was dying of cancer. John was watching someone he loved disappear, slowly, without being able to do anything about it. He was stretched thin in every direction, professionally, emotionally, personally. And Carolyn was isolated, unable to work, unable to move freely through her own city, living in a marriage increasingly defined by everything they could not fix. They began seeing a marriage counselor in March 1999. They sought additional guidance from Cardinal John O'Connor in the summer of 1999. Both of them were genuinely trying. This is important. Both of them, despite everything, were still fighting for what they had. What was really happening? But by the summer of 1999, the strain had become impossible to contain. John had begun spending nights at the Stanhope Hotel away from their Tribeca apartment, away from Carolyn, away from the marriage that had become something neither of them had planned for. He had reconnected with an ex-girlfriend for lunch. 2 days before the crash, he allegedly told a friend from his hotel room, "I've had it with her." 4 words, said in a moment of frustration. In the middle of a crisis, neither of them had fully survived yet. 3 days later, they were both dead. What nobody tells you about those final days. Here is what gets lost in every version of this story. John Kennedy Jr. was not a villain. He was not a cold man or a cruel husband. Every friend who knew him described someone who loved Carolyn genuinely, who had pursued her for 2 years because he recognized something in her that he had never found in anyone else. He was a man under impossible pressure, watching his magazine fail, watching his closest friend die, navigating a marriage that the entire world had an opinion about. And Carolyn was not the Ice Queen. She was not cold or difficult or unreasonable. She was a woman who had spent 3 years having her identity stripped away piece by piece, who had lost her career, who had lost her freedom, who had lost her ability to imagine the future she had wanted. Two people, deeply in love, completely overwhelmed, reaching for each other across a distance that kept growing. And they were getting help. That matters. They were in counseling. They were trying. Things were getting better. They ran out of time. The night that should never have happened. The 16th of July, 1999. John Kennedy Jr. was piloting a small Piper Saratoga from Essex County Airport in New Jersey to Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. The destination: his cousin Rory Kennedy's wedding at the Kennedy compound in Hyannis Port. Carolyn did not want to go. She and John had been fighting. She did not want to attend a Kennedy family event in the middle of a marital crisis, to perform happiness in front of a family that had never fully accepted her, at a celebration she had no energy for. Her sister Lauren was already booked on the flight. It was Lauren who convinced her. "Come, it will be fine. We'll go together." Carolyn went. Because Lauren was going. Because she did not want to let her sister down. Carolyn Bessette boarded that plane because of love for her sister. Carolyn boarded that plane because of love for her sister. Two sisters, one decision, one hazy July night. The crash. The flight departed at approximately 8:38 p.m. The night was hazy. Visibility was poor. John was flying by visual reference, but there was no horizon to see. No lights below. Only dark water and dark sky, indistinguishable from each other. At approximately 9:41 p.m. radar contact was lost. The National Transportation Safety Board later concluded the probable cause was the pilot's failure to maintain control of the airplane during a descent over water at night, the result of spatial disorientation. Contributing factors: haze and the dark night conditions. For 5 days the world waited. Coast Guard ships searched the Atlantic. Television cameras broadcast the search around the clock. The Kennedy family gathered at Hyannis Port. The Bessette family waited by their phones. On July 21, Navy divers found the wreckage on the ocean floor. All 3 bodies were recovered. Toxicology confirmed. No alcohol, no drugs. On the morning of July 22, their ashes were scattered from the Navy ship USS Briscoe off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, the same coast where John had proposed to Carolyn 4 years earlier, on a fishing boat in the summer light. She was 33 years old. Carolyn Bessette, the sister who had convinced her to board that plane, was 34. And what the Kennedy family did in the days and weeks that followed is something that has never been properly told until now. I want to stop here. Before we talk about what happened after Carolyn died, I want to talk about who she was in the last year of her life. Because this is the part that every other video gets wrong. She was finding herself again. The narrative the tabloids built, the troubled marriage, the ice queen, the woman falling apart, was not the complete picture of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy in 1999. Friends who saw her regularly in the months before her death described something surprising. She was starting to come back. She had begun spending more time with her sister Lauren, sometimes staying overnight at Lauren's apartment, just a few blocks away from the Tribeca loft. The two sisters, always close, had become even closer in those final months. She had begun thinking carefully, privately, about what career, what purpose, what version of herself she might still build. The woman who had wanted to teach children before Calvin Klein found her. The woman who had run fashion shows for the most powerful designer in America. That woman was still there. Everyone who knew her was confident that she was going to be just fine, Bella writes. Eventually, she was not broken. She was bending. And she was beginning slowly, quietly, on her own terms, to straighten. That is who Carolyn Bessette Kennedy was, on the 16th of July 1999. Not a woman falling apart. A woman finding her way back. What the Kennedy family did after. After the crash, the Kennedy family's treatment of the Bessette family was, by multiple accounts, cold and deeply unjust. Carolyn's mother, Anne Freeman, had lost 2 daughters in the same crash. Not 1, 2. Carolyn and Lauren both gone, in a single moment, on a single night, because of a single flight that should never have happened. Anne Freeman was a woman who had watched her daughters be consumed by a family and a fame machine she had never chosen and had no power over. She had watched Carolyn's identity be erased. She had watched Lauren board a plane to support her sister. And then she had received the phone call that no mother should ever receive. The memorial services that followed were organized almost entirely around the Kennedy family's grief, not hers, not the Bessette family's. A woman who had lost both of her daughters was made to feel like a secondary mourner at her own daughter's funerals. The ashes of Carolyn and Lauren were scattered at sea in a ceremony controlled entirely by the Kennedys. Anne Freeman had minimal input into how her own children were laid to rest. This was not an oversight. This was the Kennedy way, the family's narrative, the family's ceremony, the family's loss. Everyone else was peripheral, including the mother of the two women who died. Carolyn Kennedy, what she did. Here is something the other videos will not tell you directly. Carolyn Kennedy and her husband Edwin Schlossberg were not kind to Anne Freeman after the deaths. Multiple accounts, including testimony from people who witnessed the aftermath, described the Kennedy family's treatment of Carolyn's mother as dismissive and cold. The woman who had lost both daughters was, by several accounts, made to feel unwelcome in the process of grieving children she had raised, loved, and lost. Anne Freeman pursued legal action in the years that followed, fighting for what she felt was owed to her daughter's memory and estate. The family that Carolyn had spent 3 years trying to belong to could not extend basic human dignity to the woman who had given her life, the narrative that survived her. After Carolyn's death, the tabloid version was cemented permanently. The Ice Queen, the troubled wife, the woman who had refused to cooperate with the world that wanted to consume her. It took 25 years and Elizabeth Bella's biography and Ryan Murphy's FX television series for the real version to finally emerge. A woman who was terrified, not cold, who was protecting herself, not being difficult, who loved her husband genuinely, who tried to save her marriage, who was finding her way back to herself in the months before a hazy July night ended everything. The cameras followed her for 1,028 days. They photographed her walking with her eyes down. They screamed slurs at her face to make her react. They invented a character called the Ice Queen and sold it to millions of people. And not once, not a single time did they show you who she actually was. And all of this is why what she did matters so much. What I am about to tell you in the next few minutes is the detail that completely reframes everything you have just heard. Before we close, one detail I found that has stayed with me. More than the paparazzi, more than the Ice Queen label, more than everything. The night she stayed home. September 7, 1995. John F. Kennedy Jr. launched his magazine George at an event that generated enormous media attention. Years of work finally real, finally public. The night he had been building toward for longer than most people knew. Carolyn did not attend. Not because they had fought, not because she was angry, not because she was cold or difficult or any of the things the tabloids would later say she was. She stayed away deliberately, because she did not want the story to become about her. She did not want the cameras to shift from John's work to her presence. She did not want a single photograph of herself to appear alongside a headline about his magazine pulling focus, creating narrative, turning his achievement into a story about their relationship. She wanted that night to be his, completely, without distraction, without her. A woman supposedly cold and selfish deliberately absented herself from the most important professional night of her husband's life, so that nothing about her presence would cast a shadow on what he had built. That is not the Ice Queen. That is someone who loved quietly, who sacrificed quietly, and who received absolutely no credit for any of it. What she said near the end. Near the end of her life, she told her friend Jonathan Soroff that she wished she could be working again, that she missed it, that she missed having something that was entirely hers. Life has become a circus, she said. She said it lightly, almost like a joke, because that was how she survived, by treating the impossible as manageable. By refusing to perform distress the same way she had always refused to perform happiness. She held everything quietly, privately, with a composure the world mistook for coldness. until a hazy night in July 1999 took the choice away from her entirely. And that, I think, is the truest thing I can tell you about Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. She never stopped choosing who she was, right up until the moment she no longer could. So what do we take from the life of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy? Not the tabloid version, not the troubled marriage narrative, not the Ice Queen label the press invented, not the cold, guarded, difficult woman the paparazzi created by screaming slurs at her face until she stopped smiling. The real one. What she actually was. Carolyn Bessette was a private person who fell in love with a public man, and the world consumed her for it. She did not choose fame. Fame chose her through him, and it took everything: her career, her privacy, her ability to have children, her sense of herself as a person, independent of her husband's name. She had built herself entirely on her own terms, from a mall in Newton, Massachusetts, to the director of show productions at Calvin Klein. She had turned down America's most eligible bachelor because she was not dazzled by his name. She had stayed home from his most important professional night so he could have it completely. And what did the world give her in return? 1,028 days of being hunted. The lesson that outlived her. What I find most devastating is that in the 25 years since her death, the world has slowly, finally begun to understand who she actually was. The biography, the television series, the real Carolyn Bessette is finally emerging. Too late for her, but not too late to matter, because there is a lesson in her story that goes beyond celebrity and tragedy. When someone refuses to perform for you, when someone will not smile on command, will not give you the narrative you want, will not be what the cameras demand, that refusal is not coldness. It might be the most honest thing they can offer you. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy said, "I will not pretend. I will not perform. I will not give you a version of myself that does not exist." And the world called her an ice queen. She was not cold. She was real. In a world that punishes women for being real, she paid the highest possible price for it. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Do you think the press destroyed Carolyn Bessette Kennedy? Or was there something else, the Kennedy family, the marriage, the world she walked into, that was equally to blame? Leave your answer below. I read every single comment, and this is a question with no easy answer, which is exactly why I want to know what you think. If this story moved you, please share it. Because Carolyn Bessette Kennedy spent 1,028 days being invisible inside the most famous family in America. The least we can do is finally see her. Next week, we go somewhere that connects directly to everything we talked about today. A woman who also inherited a name she never asked for, who also lost herself trying to belong to a world that had already decided who she was supposed to be. A story of wealth, loneliness, and a family that failed her completely. Subscribe so you do not miss it. This is Mary of Shadows. Thank you for being here.